All right, so this morning we're talking about some interesting things. Some of you might have heard it. We've already talked about it a little bit. So today we're doing two things, and one sets up the other. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what God's paradigm is. Because hopefully we know that our paradigm as humans is going to be a little different than the God of the universe's paradigm. Okay, the way that he operates is different than we do, but sometimes we attribute those things similarly. So this morning we're going to start out with God's paradigm, and then we're going to talk about the overarching timeline of things, because there's some misconceptions about heaven out there. There's some misconceptions about hell. And the reality is that a lot of believers hold to these misconceptions. And so when Grant and I were strategizing what we wanted to discuss and Redeem You, we wanted to address things that were misconceptions in the church. Okay, so next week he's talking about misconceptions about the resurrection of Christ. It's going to be a really good one as well. So definitely make it here for that. But this week we want to talk about some misconceptions about God's paradigm and some misconceptions about heaven and hell and eternity. Cool? You guys good there? All right, so oftentimes we operate under the assumption that God is held by the same restrictions that we are as humans, but understanding God's paradigm can help us to understand him on a deeper level, which leads to peace, it leads to joy, and it leads to assuredness. Okay? God's paradigm. You guys want me to read that again? I know that some of you are filling those in. Oftentimes we operate under the assumption that God is held by the same restrictions that we are as humans. But understanding God's paradigm can help us to understand him on a deeper level, which leads to peace, joy, and assuredness. And I'll just put those up here because that's what we're going to come back to a lot. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is that God is outside of time. Okay, now that might not sound like a super foreign topic to you, especially if you've been in the church for a little while. Okay, but a lot of times we don't take the time to think through how we know that God is outside of time. Okay? So I just wanted to logically break that down this morning. Where do we get our concept of time? What do you guys think? Where do we get our concept of time? Where does that come from? Either one.
I always think of Genesis and the creation of sun and stars.
Okay. Yeah, so the rising and the setting of the sun, right? So we know that we get our concept of time just really easily, really simply, that our concept of time comes from the rise and the setting of the sun, right? We know that Earth operates on a 24-hour basis. We know that when the sun goes down, our day is over and night begins. And then when the sun rises again, that's when day begins. That's how we understand time. Now, do you guys know what? Oh, I gave you that one, I think. Yeah. So what is the device that was originally used to start actually counting time? Sundial. What's that? Sundial. Yeah, sundial. Right, so we started our concept of time came from the development of the sundial, which originally was developed in Babylon, right? So it's Babylonian technology, but it was used by the Greeks, and then the Greeks really built out the technology that came with that. So we know that from a sundial, right? You guys, did you ever build one of those in school, out of the paper plates and the what is that? What's that?
Noodles?
No. It looks like a sail, almost like on a sailboat. I can't remember the name of it. But you put it on the ground, and you put it out at recess, right? And then you go back in, and then you come back, and then the shadows are different, and then you can count what time it is. You guys ever do that as an exercise in elementary? No? Heidi's like, no. I love doing it. I thought it was really interesting. It's funny, I did it in second grade, and I don't know why that memory stuck with me, but here we are. Okay? It is that the sundial is how we originally achieved our understanding of time. Okay? So we know that our concept of time comes from our orientation of the sun. Right? So what does that mean? So on Earth, what's the equation? I think we talked about that Yeah, next. Because we know that time is different on different planets, right? So time is different on different planets. We're going to go through a couple examples. But what's the equation? How do we get how much time exists on different planets? How do we know how long the days or the nights are on other planets, including Earth? How do we know those things?
It has to do with the time it takes to orbit around the sun one time, and then also time for one full revolution of the planet.
Right? So the rotation speed of the planet is definitely one of them, right? The distance from the sun is another one, and the size of the planet, right? So we know that we have the distance, the size, and obviously there's more to it, but this is just kind of the rudimentary macro level. The rotation speed of the planet, okay? So just a few examples. So Jupiter's day, like the entirety of their entire day process, their day, their night, their everything, like ours is 24 hours. The one that's almost 10 hours is Jupiter. Just over 17 hours is Uranus. And Mars is the one that's closest to Earth, which is really interesting. It's only 17 minutes longer than our day, which is 24 hours. Okay? So just a couple little side notes. I'm blasting through them really quick on purpose because it's not the main point of what we're talking about. But I'm basically trying to paint this picture of the fact that time, as we understand it, is actually really what? Say that again?
It's been created.
It's created. Okay? And then not only that, but if it's different on each planet, what is it?
Subjective.
Yeah, it's subjective. It's fluid, right? It's liquid. It's not this thing that's completely locked down to this one thing, right? If time is different based on the planet you're on, okay, then that changes things a little bit, right? It makes our understanding of time a little bit more fluid, okay? So the next piece that we need to talk about is that God, we know that He created the universe, okay? And if God created the universe, what does that mean about Him? Yeah, He's outside of it, right? If God created the rotation of the suns, or the sun and the different planets and the galaxies, all those different things, right? If time is not this super linear thing anywhere you go, right? It's different, it's fluid, it's liquid. Okay, we know that God is outside of the rotation of the sun, and therefore God is just outside of time. Okay? Now, you're going to ask me why this matters in just a second. That's totally fine. But we're starting here for a reason. Oops. Out of bedtime. Hello. So let's take all of those data points and extrapolate. Why might that be something that gives us hope? What do you guys think? Because again, I don't want it to always just be data and facts, right? I want to extrapolate out why theologically it has importance that God is outside of time. Or is it just a fact with no other implications?
So He's not like us.
Yeah.
He's supernatural.
Okay? And I think to that point even, like, God is not held to our linear timeline. Which is funny because the whole second half of this class is going to be us talking through a linear timeline. Because we are held by linear time, right? But God's not. God's outside of our concept of time. He operates in it, right? However, He's not held by the same restrictions that we are. Josh, you have a question?
Oh, I was going to say another implication.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, it follows that if we're with God in heaven, we're not going to be held to the same linear timeline anymore because we are going to be with God.
Interesting. We're going to talk about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's interesting. Yeah, Lisa.
I think it creates peace too, because the idea that God sees the past, He sees the future, He understands our present. I mean,
You're reading ahead, aren't you? I'm just kidding. I love it. That's literally the next note, right? He is past, He's present, He's future, right? That should give us hope. Why? Because He's already seen it, right? He's already been there. So when God tells us things like, hey, I'm winning, I'm going to win. Satan does not win. Okay? When He says that, we can trust Him. Why? He's already seen it. So when we think about those things, okay, when people ask me, well, Trevor, are you a Calvinist? Are you an Arminianist? We're not going there today. That's a big, huge debate, okay? But I remember I got interviewed when I was teaching Bible at Life Christian. Okay, I got interviewed, and they asked me that question. Hey, are you a Calvinist or are you an Arminianist? They want to see where you stand. And you know what my answer was? Neither and both. Why? Because I believe that God is big enough where he's going to know all the things that are going to happen, but somehow in our paradigm still created us with the ability to choose. I don't know how it works. It breaks my brain, but I sleep at night believing in those two core truths about Calvinism and Arminianism. Okay, and there's other points and how many points you believe in. All those things we could discuss and talk, and we could do that discussion another time. Okay, but the reality is God being outside of time should give you hope, right? And it's a reason why, because we're talking about some stuff today that's pretty gnarly about our linear timeline. And for some people, if you learn about things that are yet to come, right, they might seem a little scary if you don't have that core truth that everything's going to be okay. And we can trust that it's going to be okay because God tells us how it's going to happen and how it's going to play out and who wins. Okay? I don't know about you. I don't like when I wasn't going to go here, but now I am apparently, is like last weekend is the Seahawks played the Panthers, right? And they played at 10 o'clock. And I'm here at church and I very intentionally don't talk to people I know that love the Seahawks and are checking the score here because I'm DVRing at home, right? And the thing is if someone tells me what the score is before I go home, I'm bummed. Because I'm now there's not that fight. There's not that question or that wonder of what happens or how does it. Instead, I already know the end score, but I just have to watch to see how it gets there. Okay? So I think some people live through this life and act like we're in the middle of a football game and it's live. And we don't know what the ending is, and we don't know what the outcome is, and it's, oh man, is he gonna come through? Is he gonna come through that big play? Is he gonna score that touchdown? Is he gonna, right? And we it's this inner turmoil, this gut-wrenching thing. I don't know if you guys like sports, but I do, and I feel it, right? Greg doesn't like sports at all. I know Josh doesn't like sports at all, but there might be somebody in here that loves sports, right? But that inner turmoil of what's gonna happen. I think a lot of Christians live in that fear. But guys, we don't need to because we already know the end score. We already know that it's done. We already know the DVR the game's already been recorded. Okay, there's nothing to yell at the TV about because they're not going to hear you because, normally they can hear you through the TV, which is what I tell myself anyway. Okay, but the reality is the game's already been won. Okay, God's outside of time. So he's past, he's present, he's future. He already knows outcomes and even tells us through prophecy what is to come. And therefore, we can trust him fully. That he wins, Satan loses, and everything that is said to come will come to pass. Okay? We can trust that because he's outside of time. Okay? I wasn't going to say this either. I said it a couple weeks ago the last time I preached on Sunday. I talked about how I like to think of God as an author of a book, of a grand narrative. Right? When someone writes a book, are they in that story? No, they can immerse themselves in it, right? Like God does. Right? But the reality is his being and his presence and his existence is outside of it. It's a grand narrative, which means he can see the first chapter and the last chapter just as equally because he's outside of it. Okay? Are we good? I feel like we're good on that. I feel like I've beaten that horse. Perfect. Okay, so all of these verses right here are there because, and I didn't put them in order because I like to keep you guys on your toes. But these are all the things, all the references, okay? Because we're going to blast through this timeline pretty quickly. And I want to make sure that we're done before 10 so that we have some room to ask questions and things like that. But I put I put some verses. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, okay? This is just the verses that we're going to be covering today. We're not going to be reading through them all, so I put them there so that you guys can go look at them later. Is that cool? All right. So now you turn to the next page, which is a really big timeline, and it's about to get really fun. I get way too excited about these types of things. I remember, Rachel might remember this. I don't know if anybody else was helping out youth at the time, but I did this with high school students, but I did it on a whiteboard and not with fill-in-the-blank notes, and it literally was like I ran them over with a dump truck. So I was like, I'm gonna give you guys a timeline to work from.
Which way's up and which way's down?
The side that only has one long line on the top is the top. So the big arrow, the long arrow pointing up is what you're looking for. Yep. Okay. All right, so tell me, in the grand scheme, so again, we're not going to talk about everything in the Bible, right? We already did that. So if you guys were at Redeem U when Grant was teaching the very first Engage 100 class, he went through the grand narrative, right? He went through the grand historical accounts of the entire Bible, Genesis through Revelation. You guys remember that? Okay, so Grant covered that. So today we're not going through every single detail. We're just going to hit some of the big main points for us to understand heaven and hell and how it all works together. Okay, because like I said, there's some misconceptions. So I'm going to drop a few bombs first, okay, and then we'll go through what they all look like. Okay, so one of the bombs is that believers are only in heaven temporarily. Okay, we're going to talk about what that means. Believers are only in our concept of heaven now temporarily. The other thing, the other bomb I'm going to drop that I'm going to fill in, okay, is that nobody is currently in hell right now. Nobody's currently in hell. Okay, so hopefully that piques your interest enough to where our discussion comes in, because some people might ask, why are you talking about these things in apologetics? Right? It seems a lot more like biblical literacy. Well, the reality is there's a lot of misconceptions about heaven and hell that are out there. Okay, and we need to be able to address them, because when non-believers talk to us about it, and they do research, right? They do. And they bring these types of questions up. If we aren't educated in those areas, right, it's going to be really difficult to continue the conversation. Because I'll tell you what, in the circles that I've ran in, you want to know who talks about heaven and hell more than anybody I've ever met before? Non-believers. It's a pique, it's a curiosity of theirs. They want to know, like, what is it like? What does it mean? How does it work? Okay, and if our understanding is limited, it's going to be tough to have that conversation. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes, which it's 9:20, so I want to end by 9:50, so that way we have about 10 minutes of questions. So we're going to get going. Okay, so what's the very first event that you think that we covered here, that top left blank? What's the very first thing that happens? Hopefully we're all on the same page that was creation. Okay? How it was done and how long it took and all those different other debated questions we're not talking about today. Okay? But we know and believe that God created the world. Okay? The next big issue that you see on your blank is, before sin happened, we'll just write that, that's fine. So sin in the garden is the next big point. Okay? In between there, what was God's intention? What was God's intention with Adam and Eve? Be fruitful and multiply, but what was his intention? Who was saying something? Okay, fellowship with him directly, relationship with him. Was death ever a part of the equation before sin? No. Okay? God intended to live with people for eternity without sin and without death. Okay? So we know, and again, like what Grant said at the very, very beginning of Redeem You is going to ring true today, is we're going to blast through a lot of stuff we can't go through. So we're just going to operate under the assumption that we all have a basic understanding. And if you don't, my encouragement would be, don't be discouraged by that, but go seek more. Okay? All right. So, sin in the garden, we know that the result was what? It was death. Okay? And separation from God. Okay? So, all of a sudden, death enters the equation. Okay? Okay? And we know that because people die, that there are going to be places that people have to go. Okay? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so first of all, before we get to that, okay, so we have creation, sin in the garden, and then we see God start lining up his people. So we see the 12 tribes of Israel get formed. Right? Who's the father of Israel? Actually, whose name gets changed into Israel? Jacob. Okay, so Jacob / Israel becomes the father. The 12 tribes of Israel, right? He has his 12 sons that are underneath him that make up the tribes of Israel. Okay, then the next part that I wanted to at least address today is that the law was given. And who was the law given to? Moses, right? And what was the purpose of the law? We talked about this a couple weeks ago, I think. What's the purpose of the law? Just the really basic, what's the purpose of God giving them the law?
To show we don't measure up.
Say that again.
To show we don't measure up.
Okay.
Tell us what sin is.
Yeah, it makes us just aware of what sin is. Okay? Or that we don't measure up. That's right as well. right? So by him giving us the law, it helps us to be aware of sin. It helps us to know, okay, this is what sin is. It helps us to be aware of those things. Okay? So in this time period, who knows where people went when they died? Where'd they go? So Old Testament covenant before Jesus, they died. Where'd they go? Who said? Okay, which is another name for that is Sheol. Okay? So we know that Sheol, which, side note, that's just Hebrew. What's the, does anybody know what the Greek is? It's Hades, right? Okay, and that's just simply known as the holding place for the dead. Now, I didn't have this in the notes, but I was, this morning as I was mentally preparing, something that I meant to put on there that I didn't, is that when you read through the Old Testament, it's not always referred to as Sheol. What also is it translated to? What else is it translated? If you're reading through the Old Testament, it talks about people dying and they go somewhere. What is it translated to? That creates a lot of confusion. It's called hell, right? So if you're reading in the Old Testament, sometimes it's called Sheol, right? And sometimes it's called hell. And the reason why that's problematic is that they're different places. Okay? But the thing is anytime it says hell, okay, there's always like a little letter next to it if you have a little study Bible and you go down below and then it says Sheol or Hades. Okay? Why? Because our concept of hell is that, well, that's just where people go when they die if they're wicked. That's our understanding on a very macro level, right? But the thing is, the reason why this causes confusion is because it's easy to translate it that way, but that's not actually where the place is. They're two separate locations. Okay, we're going to talk about where those separate locations are. But who went to Sheol in the Old Testament? Who went to Sheol? Who went to the place under the earth, which is also another thing that it's called? Yeah, everyone. Okay, so that's a big point of confusion as well, is that people sometimes get to this point and they go, oh, well, it's only the wicked. And it's like, no. In the Old Testament, the righteous and the wicked went there. Okay? Now, as was spoken about before, Abraham's bosom, okay, which is talked about in Luke 16, okay, where Jesus is talking about the instance where Abraham's speaking to the rich man and Lazarus, right? That they're talking through this situation, and Jesus is saying, like, Abraham was able to look over this chasm that was between the two, and that they were separated, but they were in the same place. Okay? So the righteous and the wicked, they're in the same place. They can see each other. They can obviously yell out and talk to each other. Okay, but there's a chasm between the two. Okay, and a chasm is just like an empty space, right? So we know that the righteous and the wicked, so if Abraham's there, what does that say? I mean, Abraham's known as what? One of the heroes of the faith. So if Abraham's there in this time period, what does that say about who's down there? If Abraham's down there, everyone's down there. Okay? Now, there are a couple exceptions to that. Some people debate about this. So again, debatable topics. Okay? Who was one of the people that might not be in Sheol during the Old Testament period? Okay? Elijah and Enoch. Why? Because it says that they got brought up into the heavens with the Lord, right? So those might be the two exceptions. Again, there are some people, again, I'm just going to present all of the variables and not take a hard stance. Okay? There are some people that believe that they still went to Sheol. Okay, but it talks about him being in the presence of God, and I go, well, to me it makes more sense that they would actually be in heaven when it's spoken that way. However, there is room to debate, right, whether or not that meant they actually went to Sheol or not. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Who else or where else in the Old Testament does it say both the righteous and the wicked are in Sheol?
So it talks about that the same language is used about them going to sleep. Right? So when they talk about going to sleep, they talk about going into the earth. There's multiple references to people in the Old Testament that we know in our understanding of how things are, that people die, but the way that it's referenced is that they go to sleep, right? Or they're placed into the ground, and it's almost like this temporary understanding. And so when you extrapolate that, when you talk about going into the place in the earth or underneath the earth, that it's referencing Sheol. And then there's also places that talk about Sheol, and they actually use that language. Like I said, there's a ton in there. I only gave a couple, But in the Old Testament, references this issue of Sheol with it being a holding place for both. Yeah, I'd have to look up a couple more, but there's a couple references in there that we can go to. That's what I'm hoping that we get done by 9:50, because then we can actually go look at a couple of these things. I don't expect you guys to take my word for it, which is why I put verses for you there. Okay? So does that make sense? Okay? So this next part's going to also help answer that question, Doug. That's a great question to ask. Yeah. Okay? So then the next part that I just wanted to talk about is that there's this era of prophecy, right? Where there's all these prophets that come, right? That's during the pre-exilic times, the exilic times, the post-exilic times, right? They're all right around that time of exile in Israel, okay, where they are captured by what 3 nations? Assyria first, then Babylon, then Persia, right? And then Persia lets them go, and then they can go back into Jerusalem, and that's where we have Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilding the temple and the walls, okay? And then we enter into what? We've talked about it a couple times in here. Yeah, 400 years of silence, okay? Which then leads us to Christ, okay? And he has the birth of Christ. And again, like, these are all things on the timeline, but on this timeline, we're only talking about, like, eternal spaces for different things, right? So that's why we're not covering all of them on all of the timeline. Okay, but we're going to skip ahead from the era of prophecy. So the birth of Christ is somewhere in here. Okay, we're going to skip to the death of Christ, because that's where stuff starts changing. Okay? So we have the death of Christ. Now, when Christ dies, who knows what happens? Where does he go? He goes to Sheol, right? So it actually says in 1 Peter 3 and Ephesians 4, right? That's on the other page if you want to go look at those. Okay, that it says that Jesus actually goes down to the gates. Okay, he goes to Sheol. Now, what does he do there? And this is what helps answer your question too, Doug. What does it say he does? There's saints down there. He's preaching to them, right? It says that he's preaching. So what he does is Christ, and that's why there's arrows, is he goes down, okay, and he pulls the righteous. And where do they go? Yeah, they ascend, right? And where do they ascend to? Okay, they ascend to heaven. Okay, so now our concepts change. Now here's what I meant about no one being in hell. What happens to the wicked here? Nothing. They stay there. Okay? So even right now in 2018, if someone dies that's not a believer, okay, that's where they go. They go to a holding place. We're going to talk about when they go to hell, because that is still a fact. That is where they will be going. But they're not there yet. Okay, again, I'm explaining this in a linear timeline. So God already knows who's going where and where everything happens. Okay? It's kind of a trip to think about. Right? It's kind of a trip to, like, back yourself out of the situation and go, okay, hold on. They're actually, I can't even go there. Do you want me to break your brain? Like, I think about this kind of stuff. Okay? There actually is a paradigm in which we're already in eternity with Christ if we're believers in him. Right? That's where your brain starts like, okay? That's where stuff starts breaking a little bit. Okay? That's kind of weird. Because, again, we're held by linear time, but God's not. So in his paradigm, we're already in eternity with him. Weird. Yeah, right? That's where your brain goes, and you have to, like, think about it. Like, you're going to go sit on the couch at home and be like, okay, this is weird, right? Yeah.
But we haven't been born yet either.
Right. Yeah, I can't go there. Okay. So now the paradigm shifts, and this matters. Okay? This matters. Because now the paradigm goes, well, Jesus died on the cross, right? The righteous that were already on the righteous side of Sheol get taken, right? So those are the Abrahams, the Moseses, the heroes of the faith, right? The Davids, right? All of those guys are now in heaven. Cool. Yeah, Josh.
Just real quick.
Please.
What separated righteous and wicked in the Old Testament?
Say that again?
What separated righteous and wicked in the Old Testament? I can't remember.
So what separated the righteous, hey Linda, what separated the righteous and the wicked was based on their heart after God, right? Like, and he actually talks about that, like those who are obedient to him. So I think about like Abraham, where it says that Abraham did what? He obeyed, and how was it credited to him? Righteousness, right? So the way that I think that, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that the way that the righteous and the wicked were separated was just if they were obedient to God, because that's how we know it's credited to them as righteousness.
Sure.
That's
so it was just Jews kind of at that point.
for sure. Yeah. So that's also the problem with this paradigm here, is that the only people that were capable of being righteous in that way would be Jews. Yeah.
But I mean, there were people that are engrafted in, like, especially with the Exodus, and it said that there were some Egyptians, who brought in their slaves, and because they started to understand, and then they went through the Red Sea.
Sure.
So if they came into the faith of God, of the Abrahamic faith.
So that's where I'm going to say this, and I'm saying this for the recording for later, okay, is that I'm going to say I don't know. Because even in that case, I think that people were capable of doing right things. It's not like everybody was wicked except for the Jews, right?
You have, like, Ruth and people who actually place their faith in.
Right, and I think that those are the exception. I don't think that that's a grand scale of, like, who is going to be credited to that way. So what I mean is, like, I think that in this paradigm that they are capable of righteousness. They're capable of, like, making correct decisions. And I think the biggest one to me is, like, Rahab, right? I look at the story of Rahab where it actually says it's credited to her as righteousness. Okay? So I look in that instance and I go, there's some outliers that might fall in that category because of that. And I think those people are specifically spoken about, right? Who's the other exception? A big one that is talked about in the New Testament, specifically in Hebrews. The order of Melchizedek would be probably, okay, they're a priestly lineage, right? So again, there's some exceptions to this. I'm going to say that our understanding of the righteous that are in Sheol are going to be majority Jews. I could say that affirmatively. Are there a couple people that might be accredited righteousness? Yes, but I don't think it's that many. Because in the paradigm of them being God's chosen people, I think the people that were non-Jews that were in the righteous portion of Sheol are talked about pretty specifically. Does that answer that? Yeah, Edson, what do you think? I could be wrong, though. I'm going to go look at this.
Back to what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So, you talked about Elijah and Enoch. Okay, but what do you do with Moses? Because you said, I don't think that he went to heaven after the death of Christ, because he comes down to see.
Right, when he's there. Yeah. So where he brings Moses from, I don't know. So it doesn't say that they came from heaven. It just says that they appeared, right? So that could be for a variety of different reasons. I don't know where they come from. I just know that they appeared with them on Mount of Olives. It's a great question. Yeah. So like I said, this understanding is like, hey, this is like the basics of what I understand. There's definitely some components where I'm like, I don't know where Moses came from. That's a great question. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I also don't see it outside of God being able to, like, bring them from both directions. I don't know if that's necessarily outside of the possibility. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Yeah, he can kind of do whatever he wants, right? Okay? All right, so we have we have heaven, okay? And then where does Jesus go? Yeah, he comes back, right? For what?
For 40 days.
Yeah, for the resurrection, right? He comes back for the 40 days, and the resurrection's a big component. And I actually would have gone deeper here, but Grant and I were just talking about where he's going next week, and it's going to flow really, really nicely. But he's talking next week about more specifics about the resurrection of Jesus, so I'll just leave that alone. But next week's going to be legit, so you should come. Okay? Right after that, we see that there are missionary journeys. Okay, and that's important. Why? From that point. Yeah, it's how everything got spread, right? It's all the messengers that go out and they spread the gospel. Okay? And from there we see the birth of the church. Okay? And then we see the body of Christ emerge, which is also just known simply as the church era. Okay? Any questions on that so far? Hopefully those are all self-explanatory. Okay? So all of this time, okay, heaven, people, including us, if we were to pass away, right, God forbid, hopefully that doesn't happen anytime soon for any of us, right, but if it does, okay, and we're believers, then we go to heaven, right, the current heaven. Now, there's debate about what Josh was talking about, which I love that he brought up because it's a really interesting thing to think about, is, well, when you go to heaven, are we still held by a linear timeline? I don't know, right? So there's some people that believe, well, we know for a fact that we're only in heaven temporarily, and I'll talk about that. Like I said, bombshells that are not common in church conversations is that no one is going to be in our current concept of heaven forever, right? And people they're like, what? It's like, no, like we're going to talk about how in just a second. Okay? But there are some people that believe, well, once we go to heaven, we still are held by the linear timeline. They like to think that they're looking down and watching how things play out and watching their family and looking out for them. Okay? And again, we should understand, we should know that like when people die, we don't become angels, right? Those are different entities. Okay? We're not the same. Angels are created differently for different purposes than we were. Okay? But here's the thing is, when we die, there's debate about whether or not we're held by a linear timeline in heaven, or if we die and then we immediately go to the last part here. Okay? And there's debate about what that looks like. Okay? But there's some hope in here. I really love talking about this. Okay? So we get to, as soon as so again, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen, right? So there's church era. There's quite a bit that's happening. So I'm skipping quite a bit. Okay? So where you fall in the rapture, pre-trib, post-trib, tribulation, all those different things, different class. Okay, those are great conversations to have, but different class. Okay, so we're skipping over all of the debated aspects. Man, we covered some big ones today, didn't we? Calvinism, Arminianism, where we fall in the tribulation. Those are like, I went to Bible college, right? So I remember sitting in dorms and people would fight about this forever, and they'd lose friendships over this stuff. I'm like, dear Lord, guys, it's not the end of the world, right? It's called secondary theology. Wherever you fall, guess what? You're still saved. It's okay. Okay? So whether or not you're a preacher or post-trib does not affect your salvation. There's the bomb drop. Okay?
Amen.
There we go. Okay? So heaven is temporary for believers until when?
Second return. Until the great white throne.
Ooh, good guess.
New heaven and new earth.
It's into the new earth. Okay? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay? So the next event that's here, so again, we're in heaven currently, temporarily, okay? And then we have what Lisa was getting to, which is the great white, if I could spell, throne, okay? Now here's a really important distinction. Who is the great white throne judgment for? Who's it for? It's for non-believers, okay? This is so important. And I get super passionate about this because I know so many people that live in the wrong kind of fear of God. Okay, we are called to have fear of the Lord, right? But that's more of a reverence fear than it is a terror fear. Unless you're a non-believer, then you have some reason to have some terror fear. Okay? But here's the thing. I used to think this, and this is why this is so important to me. Okay? Is I used to think that when I died, God was going to sit me down in a lazy boy recliner, flick on the PowerPoint, and show me all the ways that I sucked my whole life. And he was going to go play by play of all the ways that I sinned and I messed up. And I thought that forever, embarrassingly long time. Okay? And I lived under the fear of that. But what's the problem with that theology? Obviously, it's incorrect. What's the problem? Yeah, where's your sin? It's gone, right? I love the language of the Psalms, right? It says literally that when your sins are forgiven, where do they go? It actually says a location. It says it goes to the deepest depths of the ocean, never to be seen again. I literally have goosebumps even saying that. Okay? That's so powerful. Your sins are gone. Once they're forgiven, boom, done. Okay? And here's the other crazy thing, and again, I'm gonna break some mindsets here, okay, is that once you actually become authentic believer, your sin, past, present, and future, is forgiven, which is mind-blowing. How do we know that? Well, let's say that me and Zeke are having a conversation after this, and I lie to him. Whoops. But I don't go ask for forgiveness, and I hop in my car, and I drive out right here, right, and as soon as I drive out, get blasted on the driver's side door, and I'm dead. Do I go to Sheol wickedness to be judged to go to hell because I didn't ask for forgiveness for that one sin after I drove away? Right? But seriously, that's a thing. And the reason why I bring that up is because here's the thing, is salvation again. It comes back to this, guys. God's outside of time. So his relationship with us is outside of time as well. Once we are forgiven, it is a current state. So then people go, well, why do we ask for forgiveness then? Great question. Why do you ask for forgiveness? Let's break it down friend to friend. Okay? So again, same situation. I'm with Zeke. If I go, Zeke, will you forgive me for lying to you? And he's like, yeah, man, I love you, bro. Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, nuts. Cool. Yeah. Okay? That happens. Okay? Did Zeke just forgive my sin. Who has the power to do that? Not Zeke. Right? So again, if I'm asking for forgiveness from Zeke, if it's not for him to actually forgive my sin, why am I asking his forgiveness? It's to restore relationship. It's reconciliation. Okay? So people still go, well, why do I ask for forgiveness from God for all my sins then? The same reason. Right? Because what are the two things that separate us from God? Sin and impurity of heart. Okay? So if we literally ask for forgiveness once and for all, we say, ultimately, Lord, I am following after you, period, end of conversation. No matter what happens in my life, I'm following after you, God, period, done. You are forgiven. Amen. Okay? And then every aspect of forgiveness later is all just restoration of relationship. That's it. Okay? This is a huge distinction. So here's the great part. You go to the great white throne judgment, not at all. You're not sitting there with the PowerPoint. Actually, you are, but it's a different one, and I'm going to talk about it. Because here's the thing. If this is for non-believers only, which is the note there, that's a really important distinction. For non-believers only, it's a judgment of them only. If our sin is gone, what's left to judge? Your righteousness. Right? Your righteousness. Isn't that cool? Okay, and what is that called? Who knows? What is it called? Anybody know? The judgment seat of Christ, right? So people hear the word judgment, and again, we just talked about this last night at Young Adults. People hear the word judgment, and they automatically assume what they think judgment means. But is it always negative? Is judging always a negative thing? No. Right. Judging is just making a decision, right? So judgment of Christ is a good thing. Okay? And if our sin is gone, okay, so again, great white throne judgment for non-believers, okay? Not for us. Why? Sin's gone. So if our sin's gone, what's left? Righteousness, okay? So what is this then? If we're getting judged by Christ, what is the judgments? Right, it's our crowns, okay? This is for believers only. Okay, and there are rewards, right? So we do sit in the lazy boy recliner. We do flick on the PowerPoint. But you know what it is? It's all the times where Jesus goes, man, when you did that thing, man, I'm so proud of you. That was so cool. Man, when you made that sacrifice, man, that was so cool. Man, when you reached out to those people that were hurting that no one else cared about. Man, I saw that. Right? When I reached out to those people through you, when I spoke through you, when you were obedient, when you used your giftings, when you were passionate, when you were giving everything you had and no one else saw, I did. Man, is that encouraging. Right? So people think about death and all these things in such a negative way, and I go, no. There's only good for us. There's nothing to be afraid of. When I hear that believers are afraid to die, I go, let's talk. Because there's no reason for you to be scared of that. Right? There's some physical ramifications here. Okay, but if we're worried about anything past that, it's misguided. Okay? So, our sins are gone. No longer be seen. Okay? Then we're judged for our rewards. We're judged for the great things that we did. Okay? Then what's next? This is where things get a little darker. Okay, the next part in the story is the destruction, or if Grant was in here, and I'm going to say this for the notes because he's listening later, okay, is the destruction or the restoration of the earth. And again, this is a debated topic, okay? Grant and I both fall in very different camps on this, so we like to debate about it all the time, okay, where I believe that God is literally going to burn this thing up. Right? It's done. He's going to destroy it. There's brokenness here. There's death here. Right? I think God's destroying the earth and creating the new heavens and the new earth, which is what we're talking about next. Okay? Grant believes that because God is a God of restoration, that he's going to restore the current earth to where it was supposed to be. And again, both are in God's character. Both could be possible. Neither one of us are going to know, but that's not going to stop us from fighting about it. Right? Okay? So the last, yeah, right. So the last part, that's a little eye into our friendship, is we love talking about this kind of stuff. It's good. Okay. So we see the new heaven and the new earth, and there's two specific places that is talked about. Again, these are all talked about here. So we see it in 2 Peter 3, Revelation 21. Okay, where we're talking about the new heaven and the new earth. So this is where I was talking about that no one is currently in hell. Okay, because where are they? If they're wicked, where are they? They're in Sheol until when? Until the great white throne judgment. Okay? And then they go, if they're wicked, right, and they've been in Sheol this whole time, and then they go to the great white throne, okay, then at that point they are judged, in which they are sent to where? No. That's a good distinction, though. I'm glad we're going there, because that's another misconception. Okay? So where do they go? They go to hell, and hell, as we know it, has different levels of what? Degrees, right? It has different levels of, and again, we aren't exactly sure what those are, but when they're referred to, okay, is that there are multiple levels based on what?
A badger one?
Yep.
I did not know that.
Based on wickedness
I've never heard that before.
and unrepentance.
Where does it say that?
Let's go there in just a second. Yeah. Okay?
Can you say the whole thing again?
Yeah, sorry. So hell has multiple levels based on wickedness and unrepentance. Okay? And then we know that where does Satan and his demons go?
Lake of fire.
That's where they go. Okay? And so to answer your question there, Lisa, that's where people draw the distinction, is that the lake of fire is a greater level of torment than it is in hell. And then our understanding of hell, when it talks about the differences, there's just debate, right, about whether or not there are multiple levels and all these different things. And I'll talk about those in just a second. Okay, so then the lake of fire is reserved for Satan and demons. Okay? So here's the thing that's important for us to even understand. Okay? Sometimes people talk about Satan as what? What do they say his title is? He's the king of hell, right? Right? You watch like Star Wars and Han Solo, like one of my favorite narratives, right? I love Star Wars. I told you guys a while ago I'm a nerd, right? And what's one of his comments is as Luke goes back out into the snow, or he goes back out into the snow to go find Luke. I'll see you in hell. Right? It's almost this thing in our society that people are like proud to say. Like, oh, I'll see you in hell. No, you won't. You know what hell is? Eternal isolation. Where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? So I think about like when my nerves are all like on end, or like if someone's like a burn victim, okay, and all of their nerves are just exposed, right? Like that's what I think of. Okay? When I think of like, have you ever like accidentally like clipped a tooth when you're like doing something, you accidentally click it and your whole body goes, right? And like, you get that feeling? To me, that's gnashing of teeth, right? Of like just this eternal torment of the worst feelings on the planet for eternity in isolation. You're not drinking and living in debauchery and doing all these things that people like to depict hell as. That's not what it is. Oh, yeah, thanks. Okay, that's not what it is. It's not what it is. Hell, as it's defined in the Bible, is weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's eternal isolation. Okay? It is eternal torment. Okay, and for Satan and for his demons, it's even worse. Right? That's the varying levels that are in there. Okay, and I think that just like in heaven where we are judged and we are given crowns, and that doesn't necessarily make us on different levels, but that's where I'm referring to, like we're like, not that it's more righteous or not, but people based on their righteousness are judged and given more crowns based on their righteousness, right? And I think the contrary is also true where they're also judged by their wickedness. Yeah, go ahead.
So why does he have to take time to judge the wicked? Why make it worse for them? I mean, if they're all in it,
Yeah.
why take that time?
Keep going, Aaron. I don't know what you're asking.
He can, like if I was going to hell, he could judge me.
Mhm.
I mean, I know what I did wrong, but why does he do that? Because they can't change their mind.
Yeah.
They can't ever hope they would have done it different. Like, what's the meaning of now really telling me what
Yeah.
I did wrong and there's no hope?
Great question. What do you think?
I don't know.
What do you think? No, I'm serious. What do you think? I want to know.
I think he should be nicer.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think he needs to make it
Okay.
worse for them.
But I
It's
think
pretty bad.
I think it is him being nicer. But well, yeah, I don't know. Lisa, what do you think?
I'm thinking about what you're saying. I'm thinking that it's almost like he's like we know because God gave everybody a conscience, no matter where they are.
Right.
But I think about it almost like showing the world. It's a display of His glory and His righteousness and their rejection of it, so that where does it say that everything will be revealed?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing will be hidden.
Yeah.
So are we watching them be judged?
I don't think so.
No, so it wouldn't show anyone.
Okay, what else? Anybody else have any thoughts?
Every initial bow.
Yep.
And I think at that point, that's
Yeah. So again, so your question about time, so again, like God's not held by time. So I don't know if he's worried about that piece necessarily of like how much time it's going to take to do those things, to answer that first question. And then to go, what other thoughts are out there? Because I definitely have a thought, but what do you guys think? Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of have a thought, like, it's almost like, people want to say, if you're a non-believer, why would God send somebody to hell? Especially somebody that maybe lived a good life and never got saved. It's almost a testament of God's undying love, even for the sinners, that somebody that did live a good life never got to know Jesus, you still see good people out there. And I don't know if that's just, but God's just undying love for somebody that didn't accept him, but also they're not experiencing an eternal torment like that. They're kind of, like you were saying, the crowns, to whereas heaven might have, based on your rewards. As a kid, I heard something like, somebody that was really good bringing people to Christ, and, in heaven, all their crowns, they not so much lived a better life, but there was a different reward, as to where it's like somebody that never got saved. It's kind of a yin yang.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They're not living they're still in torment, but it's not an extreme kind of torment. Like, it's hard to.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're going,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think that's a really common thought in the way that we address things. But for us, like, we know that, like, people do need to accept Christ, right? It's not good enough just to be a good person, which is really what's tough about the reality of the situation, right? So we know that, like, in Romans, it says that, like, he does what? He reveals himself where? Through creation, which means that no man has excuse, right? So even if someone hasn't heard the name of Jesus, we know that what church in the book of Acts? What church in the book of Acts? Athens, right? Right, where they worship all of these different gods. They're a polytheistic society, but they were still worshiping the one unknown God that was greater than all the other gods, right? So it shows that they're capable of worshiping God, even though they don't know him by name, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's some mercy in this, right? Because Jesus, after he dies, goes down to Sheol.
Right.
And talks to these people.
Yep.
So there's still another chance for them.
Right. That's what I was going to say. So it says that Jesus preached to the souls down there, right? Which would emphasize that there might be a component. And again, this is a might be, because we don't go into a ton of data. But when it says that Jesus preached to the spirits that were down there, that leads us to think that there's a possibility that could be him extending grace and mercy as another opportunity, right? And again, I don't know. That's all it says. So it's not like there's this ton of information. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of commentaries on this. Okay. So it's debated, but it does say that he preached to the spirits there, right? So it does emphasize that there might be a possibility, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
But those people who are going to be in the final judgment all had free will.
Right. They all had the ability to choose.
And Jesus wouldn't be like, whoop, tricked you.
Right.
Now you're here and now I'm judging you.
Right.
That's not his.
What's the other parable that might be applicable to this?
Luke 17.
Oh, no.
Parable of the lost son. You come back here and spend your times open and receive.
Okay. What also about the parable of the farmer, right? Where he gives a wage based on how long they've been there. I don't know. It shows that God has mercy that, like, doesn't really make sense to us on a human level, right? And I don't know. Again, this is where the conversation goes to, like, hypothetical. This is where it goes to like, hey, this is who the character of God is. This is what we see. This is how he talks. There's some room there. I can't make a hard stance here because I don't think anybody really can. Yeah, Edson, what were you going to say?
Well, I know that there's Christians who take this, that we're talking about theology, to say that everybody believes in it.
Right, which is false, right? Yeah, so that's called universalism, right? And that's unbiblical, right? So we know that the unrighteous will be punished, right, at the great white throne judgment, talking through what that looks like, okay? But again, the level of, well, what happens to the wicked while they're in Sheol during the time that they're there, we don't have a lot of detail on that. We don't have a lot of detail on what it looks like after, right? We just know that the way that it's talked about is kind of how we build out this framework of kind of how it all works, right? So today we're able to figure out some things, right? So hopefully by us discussing our issue of God being outside of time, that hopefully gives us hope when we're thinking about all of these different things, right? Knowing that he already knows how this part plays out. Because yeah, right now we're here. Okay, so we still have all of these things to play out in our own linear understanding of time. Okay? However, there are still things yet to come. But there's nothing for us to fear if we're believers in Jesus Christ, right? Because we know how the ending goes. Jesus talks about it. You want to go, and again, I put all those verses on there for you to go research them out separately by yourself, or we can talk about them in the future. But it helps us to understand who God is, right? And I think when we talk about the great white throne, the reason why I got so passionate about the difference between the great white throne and the judgment seat of Christ is because people don't know that. Right? People don't know that when your sin is forgiven, what happens and where it goes and what the whole purpose of, right? So there's a ton of value in understanding the fact that God's outside of time and then understanding a basic understanding. Because again, we can go into all kinds of more detail in Sheol and all these different things. We can go into a ton more detail here. But the reality is that our understanding of the basic linear timeline as it plays out should fill us with hope and should also fill us with a sense of urgency for the people in our lives that don't know him, right? That would be the hope from what came from today. Yeah.
So the question for you at the great white throne, you're saying that for believers it's the, hey, here's your crown, here's your reward, whatever.
They're two different things.
Right.
So believers don't even go to the great white throne judgment.
Okay. Then, would John even go there, then why does he need to wipe away tears?
Say that again? What, the last part?
We need to wipe away our tears before we go ahead.
That's a good question. I would venture that it's probably because we know people that didn't, right? And that we're still relational beings. That's the other thing is like when people talk about heaven, they're like, we're going to be these spirits and we're just going to be up there. It's like, no, God created us to be relational beings. The other thing that I didn't say quite yet was that like God created us to be humans, right? He created us to be humans, which is why when it comes to the new heaven and the new earth, why we're going to be on the new earth is because why? We were created to be humans. We weren't meant to be only spiritual beings, right? Grant likes to say that we're going to be driving cars and going to work and doing normal life, but just in a righteous way, okay? That literally on the new earth, like it's going to go, like we're going to go through life, right? We get a glorified body. We know that it's without sickness or pain or any of those different things. So we know that there is an eternal state that's just different. And again, we don't have a ton of detail on this, right? It's a lot of conjecture, right? There's a lot of, hey, we know who God is and what he created us to be, so it's just what it might look like. But again, it's all up to debate. Really quick, Christina, and then Zeke.
Sorry, so currently on this timeline, people who aren't saved to go to Hades, is that what you're saying?
So people that are not saved still go to Sheol and still go to Hades, correct? Yep, and they're still in the holding pattern until the great white throne judgment. Zeke?
Can we still sin in the new earth?
No. That would be part of our glorified bodies of being... And so here's again, this is why I've been addressing this, and you'll appreciate this, Grant. I've been addressing a ton of stuff of like, this is debated, okay? There's no like core, like this is the way it is. So there's some people that believe that in the new earth, you're incapable of sin, like literally like infallible, like you're incapable of sinning. And then there's some people that believe that we're going to be free from the bondage of sin, but we're still going to be capable, but we'll know what sin was like and life was like before, and we won't want to go back there. So those are the two like leading thoughts around that. So will there be sin? No. But whether or not we'll be capable of it is up to debate still.
Yeah, which is like spelled out perfectly. Like whichever two camp you land in, you have to land with there won't be sin in the new heaven and the new earth because of the language around eternity and forever,
Right.
perfected.
Yep.
Right? Like that language didn't exist when you read Genesis 1, 2, and 3, right? You see good and very good. Not perfected, not forever, not eternity. But all you see in Revelation and all the New Testament pictures of what the new heaven and new earth looks like, perfection, eternity, forever. So there will not be sin. There will not be, here we are back in this fallen state again.
Yep.
Right? You're in a perfected eternal state forever.
Right.
So that's the situation that we're.
Because then you start asking a lot harder questions like, well, hey, do people have babies in the new earth?
Yeah.
Right? Are we gonna multiply further? Right? I don't know. Right? We know that Jesus talks about marriage as being only here and now, and that there's no marriage in heaven. Right? So maybe that means that we don't have babies there. I don't know. If it's a new earth, the way that God created it, it might be different. I don't know.
Didn't Ezekiel see children in his vision?
So again, there's a lot of interpretation about what that could possibly mean. Right? Ezekiel, that book's nuts. If you want to break your brain, go read that.
I heard an interpretation of that it was aborted children.
Wow. Well, there's that. Yeah. Okay. I know. Yeah. Go ahead, Doug.
Is there 1,000 years somewhere in there?
Yeah. So the millennial kingdom, that's a whole nother thing. That literally, when we talk about it, it would take a whole nother class and probably more to talk about it. So you're talking about the differences of opinion about the millennial kingdom and when it is and how long it is and if it's happening now or if it's happening later. If Jesus, there's so many, and that's a really good thing to talk about that we'll talk about in the future.
Yeah, we got a course coming next year in the spring. We're going to talk about end times, right? Eschatology, and in that we'll hit some of the different views. There's a good 3 or 4 different schools of thought on defining the millennial kingdom,
Right.
And what it actually is, and time period, all of those things, right? So essentially, 2 camps for 1,000 years, just because you brought that up, is one says there's literally 1,000 years. The other says this is eschatological language, right? This is just language that's used to say a very long period of time, right? So those are the 2 schools of thought with the 1,000 years specifically. Where that lands, we'll talk about in the spring.
Yeah.
The 4-week course.
Like I said, that's why we keep having this course, is because there's so many things in different variables to unpack. Yeah. Can I close this up real quick? Do you one last question, Edson?
Is there?
Oh, I thought you were telling me to wrap it up.
Multiple levels of hell?
Yeah.
I mean, is that something? There's a scripture that talks
Yeah. Let me look that up real quick.
You're just saying the 2 levels, the 1 and then the Satan level?
Right. So that was what I was referring to, is that the levels that exist that we know of there is a distinction between the punishment for humans and there's a punishment that is specifically for Satan and demons. So those are the 2 levels I was referring to. However, there are schools of thought of within actual hell where humans are, that there's varying degrees of wickedness. But the wickedness I'm talking about is there's a big difference of wickedness and unrepentance between people and between Satan. That was the distinction I was trying to draw. If I wasn't clear on that, that's my bad. I was trying to build it for what I was going to say next. But yeah, so those are we know for a fact that there's a difference between those 2. But then within actual hell itself, there's debate. And again, there's commentaries and thought and all these different things, and people use scripture to back it up. But again, is there a thing that definitively says, like, there's all these different tiers within hell? No. But there's thought that you could say, well, again, like I was saying, there's schools of thought that say if there's a difference on the righteous side of that, there's a difference in righteousness based on the crowns that we're given, that there's also an argument that if that's true, then the what is it called? The reverse, or that's not what it's called, but yeah, the opposite side, the inverse, thank you, is that the inverse could also be true where they're judged based on their wickedness the same direction, but just opposite. Yeah.
So, the white throne, how do we know, I'm open up to this part in Revelation, when it talks about the dead being judged.
Yeah.
How do we know, because there's no language that says it's only the wicked, and I'm looking at this going, I have always viewed this as, this is a time when we will all be gathered together, and it will definitely be this separation of the sheep.
Great question.
Because in here, when you said we were saved in Christ,
Yep.
it says, and I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. Another book was open, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. And I'm like, we have the mark of Jesus all over us.
Yep.
So that's our righteousness, and that's how we're
Great question.
righteous.
So the word dead is referring to those that are literally dead in sin.
Dead in sin.
Right. So it's saying, like, that's why when you talk about the righteous, that's why I was telling you guys earlier, when it says, like, they fell asleep, is because they don't use the same language for people that die that are righteous as the same as people that die that are not righteous. So when it says dead, it's referring to the spiritually dead and the dead, as in people that are non-believers. So when it says it opens up the book of life, what it's saying is they're looking at all the names and theirs isn't there, which is why they're being judged. Right? So the judgment seat of Christ is in 2 Corinthians 5. Right? And that's where, here, let's just go there real quick. See, I thought Grant was telling me to wrap it up, but he wasn't, so I'm going to keep going because he gave me permission. He's my boss. I'm just kidding. Okay, so 2 Corinthians 5, 9 through 11. Says, so we make it our goal to please him, whether we are at home or in the body or away from it. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive what is due him for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Okay? But when it says while good or bad, right, we know that what? The bad, the sin is gone. So what are we judged for? The good, right? The righteous. Yeah, so, and it says that we all will be there, right? So all Christians will go to the judgment seat of Christ, but non-believers don't go to the judgment seat of Christ, and believers don't go to the great white throne judgment. Okay? Yeah.
So are you saying then the crowns in heaven have like a value? Are you saying there's like tiers in heaven?
Again, great question. So are there tiers in heaven? I don't think so. But again, these are all debated. It's a great question. So it says that we're given crowns allotted to us based on our righteousness. Now, does that mean that we live differently or that we have additional rewards or that our life on the new earth is somehow different than others? We don't know. All we know is that those things are allotted to us. My guess is that if it says that the new earth is without sin, what sin might be associated with our understanding of that? Pride. Right? Like, the reason why we're worried about that is because we are sinners and we think about someone having as more crowns as something that's enviable. Again, you can't sin that way. Right? Again, if you have more crowns than someone else, that's a pride thing here. But if the new earth is with no sin, is that pride going to be there? No. Right? So are there different tiers? I don't know. I don't think so. But to my understanding is that if the new earth has no sin, then someone having more crowns than others, I don't think is going to be as big of an issue as it would be here on this earth.
What's the purpose of the crowns then?
I think it's to be a reward of our righteousness here on earth. I think it's to give us incentive almost, I guess, if you need a reward, which hopefully we don't, right? Hopefully we're living righteously without the concept of reward. But again, there's different thoughts about why those things are there or not.
We're relational. Who wouldn't love to go? You did this, so cool.
Right.
This.
Right.
Also, speaking of really the story of, you were given this gift to use, how did you use it? And I think maybe that would be more crowns, so you were given more responsibility.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if that would be your leadership role or your responsibilities will be more.
Could be.
If we're living in the new earth there and we're going to be carrying on, there's going to be
Right.
leadership.
And there's even debate if they're actually physical crowns, right? Like, are we actually going to be walking around and we're going to have like a stack of like 60 crowns on top of our head? Like, that seems weird to me, right? So crowns might just be. So again, I kind of think about John when he's writing in Revelation and he's writing what he sees. John literally is using language like he doesn't understand what he's even seeing, so he just like writes down like it's a chariot in the sky. That could be a plane. Like, we don't know. Right? But he doesn't know what a plane is, so he's associating it to what he thinks about the most. Right? So when we think about the crowns of life, it might be that where it's like, this is the only way I can describe what I'm seeing, so it's crowns. But really, is it physical crowns? There's debate, right? If there's physical crowns, not like, that's where a lot of these conversations, that's why this baseline is really important, right? For us to understand the basics, because then everything after that is a whole lot of, I don't really know. It's debated. Here's kind of what I think. This is what the scriptures say. And that's kind of that, yeah.
And just to add to that, like, cool table talk, right?
Great table talk.
Like, what spurs your faith and keeps you hungry and keeps you, like, learning and discussing are topics like this. The question about crowns, I think Trevor, like, was really sort of through it really cool. Because we don't fully know, we just know this thing's happening. And then you get a picture of Revelation 4, where it says, there are people at the throne casting their crown before the feet of Christ, right? And all glory and honor goes to him, right? So we get these rewards, right? And then there's this picture of casting them before the feet of Christ.
I just opened it up, I was gonna ask that very question.
Yeah. So that sounds a lot like what we believe about the works that we do, the credit that we receive, we give it right back to the Lamb who was slain.
Isn't
Right?
that just the 24 elders though?
So, right, so it says 24 elders, right? So again, it's a picture of eschatology, right? Like what's actually happening here, right? It could be these 24 elders, or it's a picture of the body of Christ laying their rewards before.
Yeah. So let's go. We got to wrap it up because we got church in like 16 minutes. Okay? But here's the thing is, again, the hope would be that when we take these classes, it's not so that we can just close the book and be like, okay, we did our thing and that's good. And we learned something and rad. Like, let's close the book on that. The hope would be is that today did a couple things. One, gave you hope. Okay? One, gave you assuredness, gave you faith, right? And gave you peace and gave you joy. That was the goal of today. The overarching goal of Redeem You, though, is that you would take what you learned today and go dig deeper, right? And come back with more questions and to continue discussing.